There is a community of over 44,000 people in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, who have been growing food for more than 3 centuries without purchasing a single bottle of herbicide. Not one. Their garden beds are cleaner than anything most gardeners have ever managed to achieve, and they use no chemicals, no machinery built after 1850, and no products sold in any garden center. The global herbicide market is worth $34 billion and grows at 5% every year. Millions of American gardeners walk into a store every spring and buy bottles of weed killer. The weeds come back, they buy more. The companies make another $11 billion. And 300 miles west of Manhattan, the Amish are watching all of it, standing in their weed-free beds, using a system that costs nothing and has never failed them. Here's the question. Did the rest of the agricultural world miss something? Or was the something deliberately kept off the shelf? That's the investigation. If you want more investigations like this, systems that work without products, subscribe now. There's a lot more coming. The Amish didn't invent what they do. They inherited it. The practices that keep their gardens clean trace back to European farming traditions that predate the chemical era by centuries. Before synthetic herbicides existed, farmers across Germany, Switzerland, and Eastern Europe managed weeds through soil management, timing, and plant selection. Methods refined over generations through pure observation. When Amish communities settled in Pennsylvania in the early 1700s, they brought those practices and kept refining them on the same land across 3 centuries of continuous cultivation. The modern herbicide industry has a precise origin date. In 1945, 2004-D became the first synthetic herbicide sold commercially in the United States. It was developed during World War II as part of a chemical warfare program, research into compounds that could destroy enemy food supplies. After the war, the same chemistry was repurposed for agriculture. The transition was not incidental. It was institutional. The chemical companies that had built wartime production infrastructure needed peacetime markets, and the USDA Agricultural Extension Network became the distribution channel. By the early 1950s, USDA extension bulletins across the country had quietly reclassified traditional weed management practices, cover cropping, minimal tillage, dense planting as labor-intensive, unscalable, or not recommended for modern farming. The language didn't say these methods were wrong. It said they were old. In the framing of post-war agricultural modernization, old meant inferior. That reclassification had a direct commercial beneficiary. Every farmer or gardener steered away from a permanent system and toward an annual product was a recurring customer. There is a detail in the extension literature from that era worth examining. The bulletins promoting rototilling as standard spring preparation consistently described a freshly tilled bed as well-prepared soil. The vocabulary was aesthetic and normative. A tilled bed looked right. A bed covered in mulch and residue looked unfinished. That framing was not accidental. It attached a cultural value, cleanliness, productivity, professionalism, to the exact practice that activates the weed seed bank every spring. The Amish never received that guidance. Their agricultural framework was established before the extension network existed, and they didn't trust it after it arrived. They kept doing what 3 centuries of observation had proven: that healthy soil, managed correctly, doesn't produce weed problems worth fighting. What the USDA extension bulletins reclassified as primitive in the 1950s, peer-reviewed research at Cornell, Penn State, and Michigan State has been quietly confirming for the last 30 years. The science now says the Amish were right. The extension offices still don't say it out loud. In the 1990s, researchers at Michigan State University documented something that should have changed how every gardening guide in the country was written. Agricultural soils contain anywhere from 56 to nearly 15,000 viable weed seeds per square foot, not seeds from last year. Seeds from years and decades underground. Some species remain viable for 20 years or more. Velvet leaf has been documented germinating after decades. The weeds a gardener fights today may have been deposited before they moved into the house. That research was published. It was not obscure. It was not disputed. It just wasn't the kind of finding that generates shelf space at a garden center. Because the implication of that research is this: The dominant cause of weed problems in most gardens is tilling. Every time a rototiller is run across a bed in spring, it reaches into the soil, pulls buried seeds to the surface, and hands them the brief flash of sunlight they need to germinate. The act of making soil look clean is the precise mechanism that makes it fill with weeds 2 weeks later. And the reproduction numbers make this a compounding problem. A single lamb's quarters plant, one of the most common garden weeds in North America, produces over 72,000 seeds in a single season. A single pigweed, 100,000. Till once and expose a fraction of those seeds, each of which grows to set another 72,000. The math explains why gardens that have been tilled annually for decades are harder to manage, not easier. Every spring tilling is an investment in a worse weed problem the following year. That mechanism has been in the scientific literature for decades. The USDA extension offices that promoted rototilling as standard spring practice throughout the second half of the 20th century had access to it. The gardening magazines that ran annual "Prepare Your Soil" features had access to it. Nobody connected the dots in a way that reached the average gardener. Because the gardener who understands the seed bank stops tilling and stops buying products designed to address the consequences of tilling. There is a second piece of biology that should have changed gardening practice and didn't. A study from Cornell documented that ground beetles, naturally present in garden soil under any layer of mulch or organic debris, can consume up to 65% of weed seeds on the soil surface in a single season. 65%, while the gardener sleeps, without any product, any spray, any intervention. A thin layer of straw mulch or a strip of clover between rows gives those predators somewhere to live and hunt. Bare soil eliminates them. The conventional garden aesthetic, clean, tilled, bare between rows, removes the most effective weed control agent in the system and replaces it with a spray bottle. That Cornell research is published. It is not obscure. It is available to every extension office in the country. Cereal rye produces a group of compounds called benzoxazinones, released from roots while the plant is alive and from decaying residues after termination. Research published in Frontiers in Plant Science, confirmed by work at Cornell and Penn State, documented suppression rates of up to 95% against the most common garden weeds: pigweed, lamb's quarters, plantain, crabgrass, for 30 to 60 days after the rye is cut. 95% weed suppression. No product, no spray, a plant manufacturing its own herbicide and distributing it through the root zone while the gardener sleeps. That research has been available to agricultural extension services for years. Cereal rye is mentioned in some cover cropping guides, always as a soil health tool, rarely framed as a weed suppression system with documented 95% efficacy against the exact weeds that drive gardeners to the herbicide shelf. The Amish have been planting cereal rye as a winter cover crop for generations. They didn't know the chemistry. They knew the result. The chemistry caught up with them 30 years ago. The extension offices that told American gardeners to till every spring and spray every summer had the same research. They just kept recommending the annual purchase. The Amish don't use one technique. They use a system, 5 components where each reinforces the others. Remove one piece and the others still work. Put them together and the result approaches weed-proof. None of it costs more than a bag of rye seed and some cardboard from a delivery box. The foundation is minimal soil disturbance. If a bed is already established, there is no reason to turn it over. Every spring, 2 to 3 inches of well-aged compost goes on the surface. The worms and soil biology work it in. The weed seeds stay buried in the dark below the germination threshold. Every inch of compost is another inch of darkness between the seed bank and the sun. This is not a soil health program running alongside a weed program. It is one program. The weed control is built into the soil building, and this was documented in agricultural literature decades before it appeared in any mainstream gardening guide. The second component is the cover crop. After clearing summer crops, cereal rye goes in at 2 to 3 pounds per 100 square feet, one watering. The rye establishes before winter, grows through cold months when everything else is dormant, and releases benzoxazinones from its roots continuously. In spring, 3 to 4 weeks before planting, the rye is cut at ground level and left as a mat, not tilled in. The mat physically blocks light from the seed bank below, continues releasing allelopathic compounds as it decomposes, and reduces irrigation needs by up to 30%. After 3 years of consistent use, Amish gardeners report weeding goes from a major weekly chore to an occasional 5-minute task. After 5 years, many say they barely weed at all. That timeline is documented in agricultural extension literature, in the sustainable farming programs, not the product recommendation sections. The third component is the stale seed bed, a technique that inverts the entire logic of conventional weed management. Before planting any bed, the surface is prepared as if planting were imminent, raked smooth, watered well, then left for 10 days. Thousands of seeds near the surface germinate, sensing light and moisture. Just as those seedlings emerge, barely visible, a hoe scrapes the top half-inch. That entire generation is gone in 5 minutes. 2 stale seedbed cycles before planting reduces weed emergence by 50 to 70% for the rest of the season. The math is in the extension literature. The technique is not in the product aisle. The fourth component is dense planting and living mulch. The Amish leave no bare soil. Between rows of tall crops, low-growing white Dutch clover, self-seeding, nitrogen-fixing, 4 to 6 inches high, creates a living carpet that physically excludes weed seedlings while feeding the surrounding crops and attracting pollinators. Research from multiple extension services confirms minimal yield impact on tall crops with significant reduction in weed pressure. The crop canopy and the clover close together early in the season. After canopy closure, no light reaches the soil. The fifth component, the one that made every dollar spent on landscape fabric feel like a mistake, is cardboard. Plain brown corrugated cardboard, laid directly on the soil surface, overlapped 3 to 4 inches at the edges, covered with 3 to 4 inches of straw or wood chips. Cardboard is completely opaque. It blocks 100% of sunlight from reaching the seed bank. Unlike plastic landscape fabric, which creates a dead zone underneath, allows weeds to root on top within 2 seasons, and eventually requires removal, cardboard biodegrades in 4 to 6 months. As it decomposes, it feeds the earthworm population beneath it. The cardboard suppresses weeds, builds soil, feeds worms, retains moisture, and disappears exactly when it is no longer needed. It costs nothing. It works better than every weed barrier product on the market. It has always been available in the box your last delivery arrived in. The methods described in this video are not new discoveries. They have been documented in agricultural literature for decades. The allelopathic properties of cereal rye were published in peer-reviewed journals. The weed seed bank research from Michigan State has been available to extension offices for years. The effectiveness of cover cropping for weed suppression is taught in sustainable agriculture programs at land-grant universities. And yet none of it appears on the shelf at your garden center. None of it is featured in the advertising campaigns that run every spring. None of it is what a first-time gardener is handed when they walk into a hardware store with a weed problem. The reason is structural, and it was constructed deliberately. The home and garden herbicide industry generates billions annually because it has convinced tens of millions of backyard gardeners that weeds are an emergency requiring an immediate chemical response. Walk into any hardware store in April and count the shelf space devoted to weed killers. Then count the shelf space devoted to teaching the customer how to not need them. The ratio tells the story. A system that uses cardboard, rye seeds, and compost, materials that cost almost nothing and cannot be patented, does not generate recurring revenue. A gardener who adopts this system exits the herbicide market permanently, and that permanent exit is the problem for an industry built on annual depletion. Herbicides are marketed as weed control solutions, language that positions weeds as an ongoing management problem, requiring an ongoing management product, not a symptom to be addressed at the system level. A recurring adversary requiring recurring response. The language was designed for a subscription model, and it worked. The average American household that gardens spends over $500 per year on lawn and garden chemicals, a figure that has increased consistently for 50 years. The 5 techniques in this video are not a weed control program. They are a soil management philosophy that happens to make weed control unnecessary. The Amish system intervenes at the conditions that allow weeds to exist in the first place. The herbicide industry intervenes at the weed, after it has already appeared, after the seed bank has already been activated. Different leverage point. Completely different outcome. Amish farmland in Lancaster County consistently registers higher soil organic matter and better biological activity than surrounding conventional farms. That is not anecdote. It is documented in soil surveys. Their seed bank is shrinking. Their soil is building. Their weeding time approaches zero as the system matures. The cost of their inputs has stayed the same for 300 years, near zero. The average American gardener who has been following conventional guidance for 20 years has a larger weed problem than when they started. The Amish gardener who has been following their inherited system for 20 years has a smaller one. Those two trajectories are the story. The cardboard is in your garage right now. The rye seed costs less than a bag of herbicide. The compost can be made from what you already throw away. The experiment doesn't require a purchase. It requires a decision. Try one technique this season and document what happens. Drop your result in the comments. One word describing what you found. I'm tracking every answer. And if this changed how you think about what a weed actually is, share this with one gardener you know. The best way to unbury forgotten systems is to plant them in every garden on the street.